Hey, what's going on you guys, and welcome to a new series on this channel that I will be calling Gator Inspection, the show where I game, and you watch me explain. Today's game up for inspection will be Sonic Lost World, a game that from the outside looking in, seems to be the epitome of an average Sonic game. Is that last statement true? Will I end up discovering a new Sonic game that I actually enjoy playing? Or will I find out that it disappoints me like the other 87% of Sonic games? The only way to know for sure is to play it for myself and inform you on what I think about the subject at hand. So without further ado, let's jump into a world of Sonic that some may even consider to be a lost world. Now I know I said let's jump into the world of Sonic something something lost world, but I feel like it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about the one time I did play Sonic Lost World before playing it for this video. My first and only experience with the Lost World was the demo on 3DS, and the first thing that I, and many others probably noticed when playing it, was the fact that there was a run button, as well as a focus on this new parkour-esque mechanic where you could run up walls, do neat tricks, and many other parkour-y things. At the time, there was nothing I really disliked about the demo. Didn't even dislike the run button, but nothing in the demo really made me feel like wanting to actually buy the game. And I think the main reason for that was the fact that all the mechanics in the game seemed neat on paper, but even as a kid, I couldn't really think of any creative, or for a lack of better terms, good ways for the game to use those mechanics. So, now we're here in the future. What do I think about the game now? Well, the game is pretty much exactly what I thought it would be, but like 100 times worse somehow. So, without further ado, but for realsies this time, let's dive into the game, for better or for worse. I feel like the first thing I should talk about should be the gameplay, as this is a 3D platformer. Although, I do still have some gripes with the story and a certain Deadly Six, but we'll talk about that barrel of not so funny laughs a little bit later. Like I mentioned before, this game has a medium-sized focus on parkour elements, ranging from running on walls, either vertically or horizontally, and even, well actually that's pretty much the extent of the parkour mechanics, which would be all fine and dandy. But more often than not, I'd usually find myself accidentally running on walls at very, very inconvenient times, and at other times, actually trying to use the parkour mechanics, just end up getting stuck on ledges or being jerked around by some silly stage geometry, which just so happened to be something that occurred more often than I would have liked during certain levels in the game. Then there's also the baby elephant in the room, with that elephant being the run button. Now, if you were to take any other Sonic game and add a run button to it, that'd be kinda weird, right? Even though that's kind of exactly what the dash button in a lot of modern Sonic games is, but I digress. In Sonic Lost World, there are two different speeds you get to run at, one of them being slower than you would want your neutral running speed to be, and with the run button, you've got way faster than you'd ever want to run speed. And with those two things I just said, you can come to the conclusion that those two things would make traversing the game that features a character who spends most of his time running quite annoying. It also doesn't help that Sonic is as stiff as a board in this game when it comes to, well, pretty much any form of movement you can make, especially whenever you try to make a turn that's more than just the slightest change in direction, and you end up stopping dead in your tracks for a split second before gradually rebuilding up your undesirable top speed. All of these things combined should make it case closed for whether or not the game is enjoyable to play or not, but luckily for Sonic Lost World's case, we've also got the Spin Dash. That's right, the Spin Dash is back and as spin dashy as usual in Lost World, and I found myself using it quite a bit whenever the game would let me. Which is great, because it gives you plenty of control both on the ground, or even in the air whenever you're jump wall spin dashing, and there's also the homing attack, which is okay I guess. They made it to where you can either lock on to a whole group of enemies for a chain homing attack, and also a way of locking on to a single enemy multiple times for some extra damage, which is especially helpful for the bosses. You've also got access to a kick move that works similarly to the homing attack, but it's a kick, and they both do different things to enemies, but only sometimes. But I mean, it's not the greatest ad in the world, but hey, at least it's not a bad one. There is one more movement adjacent thing that I used quite a bit during my playthrough, with that being a move very similar to the bounce bracelet from Sonic Adventure 2. Now, it's not as powerful as the bounce bracelet, but a way to quickly get to the ground in a Sonic game is always a handy tool in the toolbox. Although, within the many different forms of movement, both good and bad in this game, comes the game's biggest and most glaring problem: the level design. Every level in Sonic Lost World falls into one of two categories. The first one being your quote-unquote normal Sonic Lost World levels, where the stage has Mario Galaxy-esque planet physics. Then, you got your gimmick stages with some quirky mechanics, sometimes even exclusive to a certain level. We'll start off with the normal stages first, because I have plenty to say about this game's more, experimental levels. But when it comes to the normal stages, most of them are long cylinders that have some very out-of-place walls, series of springs and boost pads that send you hurtling towards other series of springs and boost pads, and small clusters of enemies perfect for a chain homing attack. You'll also frequently hop from long cylinder to the next long cylinder or small planetoid as you go through each level, very similarly to a certain Mario game. And that's about it when it comes to the more generic stages in Sonic Lost World, and if that sounded like a really basic explanations of the levels of Lost World, then you'd be right. They really are just that generic, but where does the problem with that lie? I mean, there are plenty of stages from the Sonic series that are fairly basic in design, all while still being relatively fun to play. Even the more widely disliked Sonic games have at least a couple of good levels, so Lost World shouldn't really be all that different, right? Well, I wish that was the case, but remember how I went on and on about how the movement in this game, leaving much to be desired? Well, combine really frustrating controls with very boring levels and you've got the recipe for a Sonic game. And it also doesn't help that the levels aren't really good for the parkour stuff you can do, due to them being very, very simple in design. And unless you plan on going for the red rings, it's usually just faster to run in a straight line to the end of a level. But if you can't parkour and the rest of the movement options simply aren't fun, then what about the spin dash? About that. You know how I mentioned that the spin dash is really fun to mess around with when the game lets you? When I said that, I literally meant when the game lets you. There are a lot of instances where there'll be something that gets in the way of you spin dashing, whether it be an inconveniently placed enemy, a piece of floor that just so happens to be at a different altitude, or even this one real annoying thing whenever you're standing on ice that makes it to where you can't spin dash at all, and instead replaces your run with an even more slippery and janky ice skating mechanic. Now, that's not to say there aren't good blips of gameplay, or even good levels in the game, but the good is very, very difficult to find. This'll kinda be going to the gimmick stages portion of the level discussion, but the only level I really enjoyed from start to finish was Zone 3 in the third world, where the whole level takes place on grind rails in an underwater tube. This level plays out more like a Donkey Kong Country minecart level than it does a Sonic level. But besides that, the music and visuals make for quite the enjoyable underwater grind rail ride. And they even reuse the solely grind rail stage again near the ending of the game, but that level doesn't really hit the same amount of good found in the first grind rail level. The first grind rail level serves as a high point in the Sea of Boredom, and the rest of the game's levels get worse as you trek through bland world after bland world, which is made so much worse whenever you have to partake in some truly deplorable whole level spanning gimmicks. Talking about each individual gimmick would be quite tedious and annoying for me to say aloud, and annoying for you to hear. So to spare you the details, most of the levels that confine you to one way of moving, like the one level where you are constantly running down a tall honeycomb tower, or the dreaded snowball level, are all the same level of meh in my eyes. There are also plenty of segments thrown throughout the game that have you bouncing on clouds very, very slowly, and to say that these segments kill the pace of each level they are in would be an understatement. Now, when it comes to the more comic gimmicks in Lost World, there is a certain plague that has infected every Sonic game since they were introduced. And if you're familiar with the Sonic series, you'll know exactly what word that starts with W that's about to come out of my mouth. And that word would be none other than wisps. Now, I've got a confession when it comes to wisps, as at the current moment I have played mostly every 3D Sonic game, except for a Sonic Boom, but let's not talk about that one. And the game where the wisps originate from, with that game being Sonic Colors, which just so happens to be getting a spruced up re-release later this year, so I might even make a video or maybe even stream that game eventually. But back to the game at hand. Sonic Lost World will usually have certain wisps tied to each stage, sometimes being just an optional thing you can use, or sometimes being mandatory if you plan on beating the stage. And most of the wisps serve the same function, with that function being a very short-lasting way to either progress through the stage or just to nab a red ring. And none of them are too miserable to use, but that's not what makes them so not interesting. The only wisp that isn't a glorified infinite jump mode is the Dig Wisp, which lets you travel underground with a 360 range of movement. And the Dig Wisp isn't necessarily that bad, but just like anything, it's good in moderation, not for large portions of a level. Wisps also usually come with very ear-grating music, so that's nice, I guess. But then, there are the wisps like the music note wisp, which is an absolute chore to use and are never really clear on how to use them. Well, they might tell you how to use them, and even some of the other gameplay mechanics via these little hint bubbles that appear on the bottom left of the screen or above Omochao once you unlock them. And those hints should solve my issues with not having any clue on what I'm doing, right? Not exactly, as I'm sure all those hints are great at telling you how to play the game, but the controls in this game are unoptimal to say the least, and whenever the hints would show up, I'd usually try to figure out what button shows me the hint, they'd disappear before I could figure out how to view them, and I would just go on without having no idea what that particular wisp can do or is meant to do. Even when I finally figured out how to access the hints by hitting the select button, they still disappear way too quick for me to press the select button, due to the hints popping up whenever you are trying to not get dunked on by everything the game throws at you. I guess it'd also be good to make mention of the Omochao and briefcase looking symbols at the bottom corners of the screen while I'm here. At a certain point in the game, Omochao shows up with some Omochao challenges, which is this game's form of achievements that grant you usable power-up capsules, very similar to the usable items you'd find in a 2D Mario game. Huh, another connection to Mario. How weird. I wonder why that might be the case. But anyway, the items you get can be used during the levels to give you anything from shields, extra lives, or even this feather thing that lets you skip to the next checkpoint. The feather capsules also just sometimes spawn at a checkpoint if you've died a certain amount of times, or are at your last life. These feather things were a lifesaver at plenty of less than stellar parts of the game, which sometimes would even let you skip whole boss fights, or send you straight to the end of a level. Now, did I use these feathers throughout the course of the game? You bet your copy of Sonic and the Secret Rings I did. I mean, every single time the game presented me with the ability to just skip the game, I didn't even have to think about whether or not I would use it. And now, normally, I don't like using skip level or portion of level mechanics in games like the white Tanuki suit from some Mario games or Super Kong from Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, even though that one owl boss did tempt me on several occasions. Huh. Another mechanic from some of Nintendo's platformers. Just must be another coincidence. But anywho, there was never a time where I had any remorse for taking those silly little feathers all the way to the end of a level in Lost World, Because if the game ain't fun, then why bother? The last thing to mention when it comes to gameplay would of course be the epic boss fights against the evil group of the week, known as the Deadly Six, which usually appear at the end of the second and fourth zones in a world. All of the bosses in this game, and even just the enemies in general, boil down to wait for them to let you homing attack or kick them, wash, rinse, repeat until you beat them, and that stays the same for pretty much in the entire game. Up until you reach the dreaded World 7, where most of the stages in the world that aren't just one bad grind roll level are just a bunch of boss rushers against the Deadly Six. And much like the rest of the game, the bosses get worse the further into the game you get. And in the penultimate level of the game, you go through the second chunk of Deadly Six boss fights, which just so happens to include the leader of the group, Zavik. The fight starts off fine, well, fine for Sonic Lost World standards, which means you jump over and run past the boss's attacks, and then homing attack, wash, rinse, repeat, yada yada yada. But then, he turns into a bad version of the final boss from New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but vertical, and you have to run away from him. Or so I thought for many, many attempts. And I am very glad that I caved in and just googled up how to beat him, because at this point in the game, I just wanted it to be over. And I found out you aren't actually meant to run away from him, you are actually meant to risk falling into the abyss by bouncing on these red blocks to make them fall into Zavik to damage him? Honestly, if I hadn't googled how to beat him, I'm sure I would have never figured out how to beat him, as the only indication that the red blocks have anything to do with how to beat him is the fact that he used those kind of blocks in the fight leading up to the chase section. But after that mess of a boss fight, we get to tackle the final stage / boss, and to my surprise, it was pretty good in all honesty. I really liked it. The fight itself was paced less like a Sonic Lost World fight, and it reminded me more of the Egg Beetle fights from Sonic Unleashed. And the boss also looks pretty cool as well, along with some great music and cinematic camera angles scattered throughout to make for a great final boss, and it made me feel like I didn't just sit through a complete failure of a game. But who is the final boss? Who just so happens to be in that Eggman's robot? The only way to figure out who is in that Eggman's robot is to start talking about the story. So, the story kicks off with Eggman being chased by Sonic, but in the air this time, and Eggman throws a capsule full of flickies down into a lost world called the Lost Hex. So that means it's prime time for Sonic and Tails to go save them flickies at the Lost Hex, but at the same time, Eggman ends up stumbling across the magic conch, which lets him enslave this random group of Zeddy called the Deadly Six. Or maybe Eggman gave them that name? I don't know. You might also be wondering what a Zeddy is, and, well, I have no clue. But I also can't really poke at not being told about what a Zeddy is, because what in the world is a Chow? Besides not knowing what in the world a Zeddy is, my biggest complaint when it comes to this game's story is definitely the Deadly Six, and how they are very Koopaling adjacent. Each of them are fairly stereotypical basic characters that, besides the leader of the group Zavik, don't really add all that much to the story. And each of the six's personalities basically comes down to, this one likes being totally crazy. This one likes to eat. This one likes to be old. This one likes to be the girl of the group. This one is me. And this one is the bad guy. Every member of the six is basically as interesting as those descriptions sound, and none of them really do more than just be what I described them as. And the only real contribution they really have towards anything is how during some levels, they'll make passive-aggressive threats towards you, which is at least something. And they also like to spit out some real unfunny jokes whenever they show up in any given cutscenes. Although that doesn't really matter too much, because the real standout for this story definitely isn't the Deadly Six, but the team-up between Sonic, Tails, and Eggman? This team-up happens because when Sonic lays his eyes on the magic conch, The first thing he does is punt it like a football out of Eggman's hands, leaving the Deadly Six to regain their freedom, and very shortly after, taking over all of Eggman's gizmos and gadgets. This leads to the combination Sonic-Eggman team-up, and with that comes some honestly pretty fun interactions between the lifelong enemies, with them needing to work together to do what needs to be done in order to save their world from the Deadly Six, who have started to use one of Eggman's machines, which is able to completely suck the power from anything it so desires, with the Deadly Six having it aimed directly at Sonic's home world. Along the way, you have several encounters with the Deadly Six, as they are pretty much the only boss fights you'll be facing as you go through the game's 7 worlds, and as the story progresses, Tails winds up getting himself captured, and Eggman, Orbot, and Cubot end up sacrificing themselves so Sonic is able to escape a fiery fate, which leaves Sonic to his own devices, which doesn't seem to faze him all that much as he was kinda carrying the team throughout the story. Although, one level later, we immediately get to meet back up with Tails, and gasp! The Deadly Six turned Tails into a robot! He's been roboticized! But in actuality, Tails quite easily escaped the whole turning to robot device, and put on a funny robot suit anyways, because that'd be way funnier than trying to turn off the world energy sucky machine. Way to go, Tails! I also kinda wish that Robo's Tails stuck around more, and maybe even future games as well, because Robo-Tails was kinda funny, but that's besides the point. We then fight Zavok and the rest of the Deadly Six in the not the best boss fights like I mentioned earlier, and after defeating all of them, we find out that, surprise, Eggman played Sonic like a fiddle the whole time. He didn't fall in the lava, he flew away with a jetpack even though Sonic watched him fall for quite a while. But let's not think about that for now, we have an Eggman to beat, and one actually good final boss later, Tails makes the world juice sucker, give all the world juice back to the world, and all's well that ends well, right? You also get a glimpse of how Sonic's world in Lost World looks like at the end of the game, and it's completely different from every other Sonic game's world. Man, I wish Sega would just stick with one world for Sonic and just run with it, maybe even explore different aspects of it throughout multiple games. But, I mean, considering how the new Sonic game looks to be another new looking world, we're probably not going to get that in the next Sonic game either. Unless the game is Sonic Adventure 3 like some might think it might be, but who knows. I'd also like to point out that besides being the thing that gets Team Sonic and Team Eggman working together for a lot of the game, the Deadly Six do pretty much nothing, and could have very well just been replaced by some rogue Eggman's robots or even Metal Sonic like in Sonic Heroes. Now, I can respect Sonic Team for wanting to try to make a whole entourage of bad guys to go up against Sonic, because Sonic hasn't really ever done a villain group to the extent this game did. But I feel like they didn't go as far as they could have with the Deadly Six, as they were pretty much just roadblocks for the most part. I think it would have also been cool to not do the whole Eggman was the true bad guy the whole time thing again, and instead let Zavok and the rest of the Deadly Six get to be the final boss in some way, and have Eggman maybe even help you during the fight. Kinda like the Sonic and Shadow team-up at the end of Sonic Adventure 2, or the many times Mario and Bowser have worked together in a game. But that's sadly not how it went, although the final of the boss of the game was still pretty cool, so I guess I'll let it slide this time. You can also unlock a secret 8th world after beating the game, and yeah, I don't really think I want to do that now. I'm sure the hidden world is great and all. Well, actually no, I imagine it's like all the other worlds, so I think I'll pass on it for this video. Also, Knuckles was in this game. For some reason, like, he's just there. He doesn't do anything. He's just there. I mean, Amy is also there, but she does contribute a little to the story with telling Sonic how the planet's currently doing with it being sucked and all. But Knuckles is just kind of there. More power to him, I guess. Whew. What a story, am I right? Anyway, let's talk about the music. The music in this game ranges from a couple of very upbeat and catchy songs to songs that I wish weren't playing while going through a very annoying level. Yeah, a lot of the songs tend to be very similar to the wispy music, with being really short and repetitive loops that make some of the stages in the game feel a lot worse to go through than they usually are. And the only songs that stuck out to me after finishing the game was the main theme, probably because it's been played every time I boot up the game, because I definitely was not able to just sit down and play this game for more than an hour at a time, and the song for Zone 4 of World 2, due to that song being an actually dope one. And then the rest of the game's songs were either kind of okay or repetitive and annoying, which sucks because usually if the Sonic game is bad, the music is at least somewhat redeemable. But Sonic Lost World is a different breed of Sonic game. And I'm pretty sure that this isn't only my least favorite Sonic game, but it might just be one of, if not my least favorite games I have ever played. And just saying that it's my least favorite Sonic game alone is kinda crazy. I mean, Sonic games like Sonic 06, Boom, even though I haven't played it, and Forces exist. And even with those, at least they have like a small amount of funny to them, whether it be real epic glitches or, well, I mean, Sonic Forces doesn't really have much of anything. But Sonic Lost World has even less of anything than Sonic Forces. It really is just that bland and unenjoyable. And I don't think a good final boss and a good rail grind level were really enough to save the game, sadly, so I can safely say it's my least favorite Sonic game. That last sentence, for all things considered, should be the end of the video. I mean, I wrapped up my thoughts with a nice little bow on top. But there is one more thing that is Sonic Lost World adjacent that I'd like to talk about, and that thing being the game's glaring similarities to a certain series about a Brooklyn plumber who just so happens to like to wear red. I've already mentioned some of the things that were pretty Mario-esque about the game, but I'd like to go into a little more detail. Now, I'm not saying that all Sonic games are imitating Mario, but I don't think I'm too crazy for thinking that Sonic Team may or may not have taken some creative liberties with a lot of the concepts found in Lost World. The biggest example of, wait, that's Mario, is the planet physics, seen in most of the levels in the game being seemingly very Mario Galaxy. It could be argued that Lost World actually took the weird camera angle planet idea from the cancelled Sega Saturn 3D Sonic game Sonic Extreme, which was actually meant to be the first 3D Sonic game before the combination of its development being very shaky and the Sega Saturn's opposite of success led to it being canned. But given the fact that Mario Galaxy was so widely loved by pretty much everyone that played it, I highly doubt Sonic Team got the planet physics concept from a random cancelled Sonic game meant for the Sega Saturn. The planet physics isn't the only thing taken away from Galaxy though, as pretty much every design choice in Sonic Lost World is alarmingly similar to the plumber's adventures in space. Everything from the way you travel to new areas during the levels to even some of the gimmicks feel like they were ripped straight out of Mario Galaxy. But if they did just reuse a bunch of stuff found in Galaxy, they should have at least added the parts everyone liked, right? Well, you see, that's the weirdest part. Lost World feels like Sonic Team took all the worst parts from Galaxy and then proceeded to make them 10 times worse. For instance, that one cloud gimmick is very similar to the spring power-up from Galaxy in, like, the gameplay aspect. And if you're gonna take anything from Galaxy, please don't let it be the spring power-up. I could go on and on about the mechanics that Sonic Lost World may have borrowed from Galaxy, but much like talking about Sonic Lost World itself, that'd prove to be very boring. And I feel like just watching some gameplay of Lost World would seem a little too Mario Galaxy to most people who have played or even seen a little bit from both. So instead, I'll just talk about all the other stuff that Sonic Team snatched from the old Nintendo. like the Deadly Six being carbon copies of the Koopalings, or the exact same world themes used in pretty much all the new Super Mario Bros. Games and then some, and I'm not even sure why they would even want to copy those aspects from Mario, as those things are the things that Mario fans around the globe have been complaining about for quite a while. So it's especially weird that Sonic Team decided to use those ideas from Mario, considering nobody really likes the more bland themes or generic bad guys. It's like copying someone's homework, but the person who did the homework didn't do a good job, and on top of that, added in a nice amount of grammar mistakes, and then lost a lot of it because your dog ate your homework, but only like half of it. It just doesn't make much sense. And I feel like Sonic Team hasn't done a really good job of modernizing Sonic like a lot of other game studios have for their series. Now look, this isn't to say that Sonic was never good, or Sonic's had a really rough time since his transition into 3D, and I haven't been dunking on Lost World because I hate Sonic. Quite the opposite, actually. I just want to see this blue son of a gun succeed, since I've been playing these cursed games ever since, well, ever. A lot of my first experiences with video games were Sonic games, like Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, all the classic Sonic games via the Mega Collection on GameCube. Even Sonic Riders and a little bit of Shadow the Hedgehog along the way. And a lot of those weren't too good either, but they were fun. They had heart. One of them had a Chow Garden, and it's one of the best things that someone has ever come up with. And Sonic hasn't been the absolute worst in more recent years either. In 2017, we got Sonic Mania, arguably one of, if not the best Sonic games and 2D platformers in general. Well, I mean, we also got Sonic Forces that year as well, but let's not talk about that right now. With Sonic Mania's smashing success, I think it's about time to entrust Sonic to more people than just Sonic Team. I mean, just look at all the Sonic fan games that have been made over the years, some of which were even made by the team behind Sonic Mania. There's not much known about the new Sonic game from Sega officially, aside from a 4chan post that may or may not be true, and might also not paint the game in a very good light. But there's always room for improvement, right? Who knows? All I know is I'll probably buy it on release and either be disappointed or be pleasantly surprised like every other Sonic game. But I'm hoping that it turns out all good, or at least it's not as blissfully boring like a certain Lost World that I wish Sonic never returns to.